Chapter 18. I didn't, of course, have much to compare them to, but the next days seemed to be among the most difficult I had ever experienced. I spoke to Damon coldly, if I spoke to him at all. Often, when he commented on the weather or how close we were to Esh's hideout, I did not answer. I barely ate so as not to interact with him, and used icy pleasantries when I did, turning away before I could see how he took my curt words. And the dreams got worse. Philip's words rang in my head, my Nicola. I woke from dreams of his voice whispering promises I could not remember, afraid and exhilarated all at once. I dreamt of a windswept castle and laughter around a banquet table. I dreamt of bodies at my feet, and did not know if I had ever seen any of this before, or if it was no more than the shape of my own fears. We reached the Mediterranean after only a few days. In Damon's shadow land, the land we traversed was indistinguishable from the land we had traveled to get to the Acadam, or at least it was right up until the end. Even Damon's forest was no match for the arid sea winds, however, and gradually the forest trailed away into cypress and scrub brush, olive and citrus groves showing their twisted branches to the sun, with the occasional whiff of lavender on the breeze. We made our way up to one of the rocky bluffs, and I had the jarring sense of seeing both worlds at once. Beaches filled with tourists, yachts gliding serenely across sunlit waters, and a beach deserted save for the waves and the wind, schools of fish swirling untroubled in the sea beyond. Damon sank down, eyes closed. I would have asked him what he was doing, but I had found that it was easier not to talk to him at all than to try to stay cold and dismissive. When he talked, especially about magic, his whole face softened and I found myself being drawn into his world. Or pretending. I wasn't a part of his world, I remembered. Not at all. His hand rose, pointing southwest, almost exactly along the line of the setting sun. What is it? I knelt down next to him to look where he was pointing, then helped him up before I remembered that I wasn't supposed to be doing things like that. That's where the island is. He looked at me curiously, as if wondering why I deigned to talk to him now. Sorcery distorts the world in a different way then, he broke off, shaking his head. Never mind. We can start walking now, if you're ready. I'd been leaning in, interested to hear how he'd found Esh's island, but his cold tone reminded me not to get involved. Right? I gestured along the bluff and nodded. I'm ready to go. He looked at me for a moment, and then shook his head slightly and took the steep path down to the beach. We walked across sand undisturbed by human footprints, my boots sliding and the heat rising up through the soles. And Damon led me directly out onto the water. I blinked, wondering if this was some kind of test. Was he going to transform into a manatee and have me ride him? No, he was actually walking on the water. I watched as the waves swirled and broke around his feet, mesmerized. He stopped and looked back at me. Are you coming? Yeah. I hurried out to join him. It was a disconcerting experience. The water gave a little under my feet, and the splash against my boots was both wet and not in some bizarre way. As we got farther out, past the breakers, the spell wasn't able to keep us walking flat any longer, and the sensation became somewhat akin to climbing sand dunes. But sand dunes that moved under your feet, lifting you and sending you skidding down the other side with your arms windmilling for balance. Damon, annoyingly, seemed to have no trouble with it at all. Esh had supposedly hidden her island in this world, but we were nearly on top of it before I saw it. It appeared first as a sudden coldness in the air, and then the coldness was revealed as a shadow that seemed to come from nowhere. When the island appeared out of thin air in front of me, I found I'd been half expecting it. Not 5 feet from the shore, I stared up at the rocky spit of land warily. Let's get this over with. I waded past Damon, thoroughly soaking my boots in the waves on the tiny beach, and made for what appeared to be a staircase cut into the rock. Wait. He reached out to grab my arm. Before you start up. The look on my face must have been forbidding, because he faltered. He recovered admirably, however. Before you start up, you should know about Esh. She's old-fashioned. So be polite. I shrugged. I can do that. You know how to be polite like a Ptolemy. He was clearly done with my not caring attitude. Because when I said old-fashioned, I meant Egyptian. The Ptolemies were Greek, I informed him. I sighed. But no, I don't know any of that. Care to enlighten me? It's the only way you'll get me off your hands. I don't want you, he sighed, opened his mouth and closed it, and shook his head. Just give her respect, he said quietly. She's your elder. It's paramount that you not talk back to her. After 5,000 years, I should think I've learned not to get too upset by backtalk. A new voice interrupted us. I got the distinct pleasure of seeing Damon jump and go pale. Then I looked around, and I was pretty sure my jaw dropped. I knew I had seen this woman before. I would have known it even if Damon hadn't told me that she once trained me. But there was no memory or picture alive that could have captured that face. Esh was old, ancient, It showed in every movement, every glance, every word, and yet her hair was still black and glossy, her copper skin smooth, and her carriage unbowed. She looked like a force of nature, something as eternal as a mountain but given human form. To look at her, one might have thought she was a goddess. I wondered wryly what the difference was. Damon Braddock. Ash swept down the staircase. Her robes were white, a pleated linen that called to mind all of the old hieroglyphs from Egypt. Child of Ire. And what does old Taliesin think of his students serving the Acadam? Damon stood frozen as she came to stare up at him. She barely came halfway up his chest, but her gaze made his shoulders hunch. You know me? He managed. Ash snorted. Of course I know you, boy. I know everything important that goes on. I know more about what's inside that head of yours than you do. She punctuated her words by stabbing at his chest, eyes narrowing, but gave an elegant shrug a moment later. Although you did surprise me a few days ago, rebelling against Tarek like that. What turns a hunting dog into someone else's guard, I wonder? Then again, she looked over at me and her gaze seemed to pierce me all the way through. Nicola always did have a way with people. She made her way over to me slowly, staring me down, and I said the only thing I could think of. I don't remember learning from you, but Damon says I did. She looked at me, just looked, and I remembered Damon saying that gestures and spells were only an aid. Ash, accomplished at sorcery as she was peering into my head without so much as laying a finger on me. Yes, she said finally. So I see, and you can forget your request. The answer is no. What request? Damon asked, at the same time as I said. But nothing, Ash said flatly. No, I won't do it. She needs her power unblocked, Damon said angrily. He stepped back when Ash turned to look at him. It's true, he insisted. His voice was fierce. The block is failing, and so are the spells over her memory. They need to be taken away. I wasn't arguing with that, druid. Ash somehow managed to look warily amused without moving so much as a muscle in her face. I was talking about her request. It would be best, I said quietly. You know it would be safest. It would be neither. She lifted an eyebrow. If you took the time to think for once, you'd know that. You were always impulsive. I should never have trained you before. Her eyes raked over me. Now, there's a chance. She turned to climb up the stairs, muttering to herself. 4,000 years old and taken in by talent. What a fool I was. Does she fool me twice? I wonder. Wait. I cast a desperate look at Damon and went to scramble up the stairs behind Ash, barely missing the trailing skirts of her robes. Someone named Philip is looking for me. He wants my power again. So don't give it to him, Ash said simply. God's alive, young people. Always making such a fuss out of everything. Hey, I grabbed her arm. Listen to me. The look she gave me would have melted stone. I pulled my hand away, suddenly glad I still had it. She stared at me for a long time, and I was aware of the gulls and the waves and Damon staring up at us. You have a great deal to make up, she said finally. Ask yourself how you will do so without your magic. I looked down at the ground. And tell that poor boy to come upstairs and get some dinner, she added. And stop being so rude to him. Esh. But she was already gone. I looked down the stairs at Damon, who was pretending he hadn't heard any of that. Apparently there's dinner. I shoved my hands in my pockets. You're supposed to come up and have some. He nodded silently and started up the stairs, and we fell into step with one another. We were almost to the top when he said quietly, So that's Esh. That wasn't quite what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Flashes of light, dramatic voices. He shrugged his shoulders. But she's like my grandma. Well, on the plus side, that's less scary. You clearly didn't know my grandma. He shook his head and opened the heavy door into what looked like a Viking longhouse. After you. I nodded, and then remembered Esh's admonition. Thank you. He only nodded, but I caught him smiling as we slipped into the darkness of Esh's house.